This video is sponsored by Squarespace, an all-in-one platform to build your own website, shop, or portfolio and create a compelling online presence. Hello, sunbursts and sand surfers. My name is TB Skyen, and hey, you ever hear about Shurima? Big desert, lots of sun, huge furry community? Well, Shurima has a lot of champions at this point and a lot of stories, but as I have complained about 1,000,000 times before, those stories don't get nearly as much telling as they really should. There's a compelling drama there between Azir and Zerath, and a fun do-gooder Robin Hood adventure in Akshan. Talia's journeys with Yasuo and then Kaisa are exhilarating in theory, but only sketched out in fairly vague terms in actuality. But one of the most compelling narratives in the region, and one that was expanded upon quite beautifully when Legends of Runeterra added them to their decks, is the Brotherhood of Nasus and Renekton. Renekton was traumatized and broken by 1,000 years battling Zerath in the Tomb of Emperors, and Nasus' spirit was shattered by the loss of his beloved brother. But their most recent stories have at least intimated that with time and determination, Nasus might call his brother back to his senses, and in so doing, begin to heal his many centuries of guilt. But something that's missing from the brothers a bit, I think, is an exploration of why they are so close in the first place. They're brothers, yeah, but siblinghood is no guarantee of affection, and their lore is disappointingly mum on the details of their lives and relationships. Most of their backstory is focused on what happened after their ascensions, which, fair enough, that's probably the most exciting part, but what gives their relationship gravitas is everything that happened before that point, the lives they led that made them who they are. Now, I don't anticipate Nasus and Renekton getting a season of Arcane anytime soon, although I think they would be prime candidates. And with K'Sante, Riot seems to be looking forward in time in Shurima, exploring what happens next rather than what has happened before. So, if we want to know the story of these two brothers, or at least some of it, I think we might have to imagine it ourselves. First though, I need to pay the bills. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, an all-in-one service for creating a dynamic and compelling presence online. Squarespace has a ton of features that can help you create either a cool and professional-looking portfolio or even a central hub for your whole online business. You can use Squarespace to create a custom commissions storefront, complete with all the tracking and administrative tools you need to track orders and fulfillment, or you can use it to host a webcomic. That's what I did with Squarespace back in the day, and while the comics that I made back then haven't aged super great, cringe to look at them now, the site that they're displayed on still looks remarkably nice, especially considering it was put together by me, a man with the technical coding skill of a wet potato. If I can build a site with Squarespace, then believe me, anybody can. So head to squarespace.com to start a free trial, and when you're ready to launch the site, go to squarespace.com/tbskyen to save 10% on your first purchase of a website or domain. He's been staring at the crack in the wall for the better part of an hour, red-rimmed eyes boring into the rock. The bruise on his cheek throbs. He ignores it, and he ignores the taste of iron and salt in his mouth, and the cuts on his arm, which still burn. He stares. At last, the sand by the wall quivers, and a tiny sand skink pokes its head through the crack. It turns left and right, taking in the room, and briefly scents the air with its tongue. He stares. A pair of fine leather sandals flap across sandy cobblestones, whipping up little clouds of dust as they run. The merchants of the market alley stop their hawking and stare, briefly, at the figure as it passes. His robes say he has money, his demeanor says he is impatient, and the golden sun disk embroidered on his shoulder says he has authority. Nobody calls out to him. The skink slinks out of the wall, stopping every few steps. There are food scraps on the floor, scattered around an overturned bowl. It eyes them. The man on the bench sits hunched forward and statue still. He stares. After a long moment of silence, the skink ventures forward another few steps, then another few, then another. The man on the bench stares and slowly moves his arm. The skink immediately skitters and flees back into the crack in the wall, disappearing like a shadow under sunlight. A few moments later, when it pokes its head out of the wall again, the man's hand is lying open on the floor. It is thick-fingered and rough, and the knuckles are raw and bloody. But a piece of slightly sandy chicken is glistening in his open palm. It licks its eyes and smells the air. It hesitates, and then it steps out towards the bait. The running man makes his way past stalls and through pedestrian crowds, huffing and heaving with the effort, until the alleys open up and disgorge into the grand city plaza. He runs another 10 feet, perhaps, and teeters to a stop by a decorated palm. He leans on it, gasping and panting like a dog in the sun. He feels a rattle in his lungs and digs his nails into the tree trunk to steady himself against a racking cough. He spits a wad of slime into the sand. There's a fleck of red in it. He stoops, with some effort, lowering his mouth to the little running aqueduct that flows from the sun disk totem at the center of the plaza. He scoops water into his mouth and onto his face, cleaning off the sweat and spittle. He coughs again and catches himself, suppresses it. He forces himself upright, wipes cold water across the skin of his neck, and determinedly steadies his breath. Across the plaza, a pair of guards lounge casually by the Peacekeeper Hall. He pulls himself together and sets off towards them. The jailer hurriedly stups out a foul-smelling clove cigar on the floor. "Shit's sake, you could have told me earlier." "How was I to know?" whines his assistant, stuffing a parchment with an inappropriate drawing away in his desk. The jailer quickly washes his hands in the running sink, wiping them off on his grubby tunic. "Fuck, is he coming?" he says, pulling his sandals back on his feet. "I don't know. Osram's keeping him busy," says the assistant, trying to tie his hair back presentably. "We've got a minute, maybe, but—" Slam! The door flies open and Sergeant Osram barges in. "Attend!" he barks, and the two men snap to attention the best they can, hoisting their weapons hurriedly. Osram himself is sweating and trying to fold away a crease in his tunic as he steps aside, and the visitor strides into the office. It smells of clove cigars and piss and day-old meat left out in the heat. The visitor's nose wrinkles and he has to repress a gag. His sense of smell has always been too keen for comfort. He looks around the dingy room briefly. "Well?" he asks, and his voice is deep and resonant, almost inappropriate for his skinny frame and sunken eyes. Right, yes," says Osram, startling from his place at the door. "Yes, right this way, sir, right." And he leads the visitor towards the holding cell. "You lot, stand by," he barks back, and they disappear down the hallway. "The fuck is that guy?" whispers the assistant, still stiffly at attention. "He's brass, man," growls the jailer. "Military. He had the patch and everything. You don't fuck with those guys." "Looks skinny as shit, though." "Shut up. Just stand straight till he's gone." Osram hesitates with the key in front of the jail door. "Is there a problem, Sergeant?" asks the visitor. No, sir, it's just that..." Osram looks around conspiratorially and leans in to whisper. "He's not right in the head, you know. They said he beat 9 men unconscious. But when the guards showed up, he just stood there. Didn't even put up a fight when they took him. It's not natural, sir." The visitor stares at Osram. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to warn..." The stare was withering. Yes, sir." The key rattles in the lock and the barred door slides open. "Thank you, Sergeant. That will be all." Osram hesitates. But, sir, I'm not supposed to leave the door on guard." "That will be all." When the sergeant's footsteps have disappeared down the hall again, the visitor sighs deeply, and his posture, which was regal and straight-backed, deflates a little. He steps into the cell and sits on the bench next to the prisoner. A long moment of silence passes between them. "It was 12 men, not 9, says Renekton. "I heard 14, says Nasus, leaning back on the bench. "And I also heard you threw a whole barrel of wine at them." "No, that just fell over." Nasus raises an eyebrow. "It fell over when I threw someone at it." "Brother." "Did you come to lecture me?" There's another long moment of silence. Nasus reaches into his robes and pulls out a flask of liquid and a small cloth which he wets. Renekton hisses and whips his head away as Nasus touches the cloth to his bruise. "Sit still," Nasus growls, and grabs his younger brother's chin to hold his head. "I don't need it." Renekton flinches at the sting of antiseptic. Some of them had swords, Renekton.
Didn't know how to use them. Ow!
Nasus dabs sharply at a cut on Renekton's arm. Indeed, he says, wetting the cloth again. He takes Renekton's hand and begins wiping away at his bloody knuckles. What happened? He asks. Renekton evades it.
Yeah, I was just drinking. They started talking shit.
Nasus doesn't look up. The 12 men were officers at the Collegium of the Sun, and he knew that because he had spent the last half a year teaching them tactics, and he knew, from talking to Osrim, that the fight had started when one of his drunken students had loudly called his teacher a fatherless dog. He stares at his brother's bloody knuckles and the cuts running up the length of his arms. "Who is your friend?" he asks, nodding at Renekton's shoulder. The sand skink pokes its head out from under Renekton's long, wild hair and licks its eyeball. He growls something indistinct and shrugs. The skink inclines its head.
You don't need to clean me. I can bathe at home.
Renekton's voice is sullen. "You are not going home," says Nasus sternly, wiping at his brother's forearm. "You're going before the magistrate."
Well, for a bar fight, I didn't kill anyone. They stick you in the tank for a day and then you go.
"You're going before the magistrate." Nasus whips something out of his robes and slaps it onto Renekton's knee. "To take the oath." Nasus wipes a fleck of blood from his brother's cheek and sits back. Renekton picks up the folded parchment and opens it. A golden pin catches the sunlight through the bars in the window. The sand skink cocks its head curiously at it. It's the symbol of the Golden Guard, the personal regiment of the Emperor. There's a long moment of silence.
"You can't give me this,"
says Renekton, quietly, staring at it. "I can, and I have. You'll start as a private."
"I never had no training. I didn't enlist. How did you—"
"Oh, it's taken me months. You wouldn't believe the paperwork. But once they heard you defeated 14 men unarmed, well..." Nasus tries for a wry, casual tone. It falls flat. Renekton clenches his fist round the pin.
"Why do you keep doing this? You keep coming back for me. Stop coming back!"
Nasus reaches for Renekton's face, but he shoves him off.
"You're not supposed to come back. We got you into the Collegium. You made it. You were supposed to—"
He slams his hand on the bench.
"I'm not like you. I'm alley trash. You put your reputation on the line for this?"
He shakes the pin at Nasus.
"For me? If I fuck up, you lose everything."
He throws the pin on the floor where it tumbles once in the sand. Nasus rises slowly and picks it up. Renekton hunches his shoulders on the bench.
"You're the one who's supposed to make it. You're the smart one. I don't want to screw it up. I want you to make it."
Nasus grabs his brother's forearm and, with some effort, pulls him up from the bench and pushes the pin back into his hand. He touches his shoulder. "Not without you." Nasus traces the sigils of a dead language across parchment. It is an old prayer to the sun disk, or so the previous translator had interpreted it. The old translation lays open the pile of books beside his desk, its pages covered in corrections. No, not a prayer. That is merely the bias of modern interpretation. The language is declarative, authoritative. It's a command, not a prayer. And the language is informal, using contracted forms of ritual speech. Indeed, it reads more as though barking an order to a servant than a supplicating prayer to the gods. The sun disk was not always considered divine. There was a time in Shurima's history where it was considered little more than a tool to be used by emperors as a means to raise armies. The oldest records imply that the first emperors were not Shuriman at all, but rather gods descended from some far distant mountain. To write such things openly was to risk the charge of blasphemy, but Nasus did not plan to be alive when his findings were published. He pauses his quill and stares for a moment at his hand. The veins protrude like a spider's web, coiling over his bones under the paper-thin skin. He marvels for a moment at the complex beauty of the body, how perfect its mechanisms. He remembers he had a volume on anatomy and dissections around here somewhere, untranslated from its original West Ionian. Perhaps that should be his next monograph. He puts the quill down and reaches for his cup of water. But as he lifts it, his hand begins to shake. The trembles propagate through his arm as he stoops to bring his lips to the cup's edge. A shock of pain runs through his shoulder suddenly, and he yelps, dropping the cup with a heavy thud on the floorboards. Damn. Heavy footfalls thunder up the stairs, and Renekton bursts through the doors like a battering ram. I only dropped a cup. It's...
You're not to be out of bed.
Please, brother, I feel better today.
The physician said rest.
Renekton sweeps past Nasus, taking him gently by the arm and ushering him back towards the big canvas bed they'd set up in the study. Renekton, really, there's no need to... Nasus protests, but erupts in a cough, doubling over. He hacks and heaves, and his legs give out, and Renekton holds his forehead to steady him. Flecks of blood stain the fine woven carpet, fresh and red, next to dull, brown, old ones. It subsides, eventually, and Renekton physically picks Nasus up. He's too exhausted to protest. Nasus slides beneath fine silk covers, and Renekton pulls another pillow up behind his back. I have so much left to write, you know, says Nasus. Renekton wrings water out of a cloth and begins to clean the blood from around his brother's mouth and nose. His hands are calloused and scarred, several fingers are missing their nails, and one is missing 2 joints, but they dab the cotton gently at his brother's withered skin. I wanted to write a whole library. You will. Nasus smiles weakly. I wrote another monograph, you know, he says, coughing again. It was to be the centerpiece. What's it called? Asks Renekton, not really listening. He dabs Nasus's forehead, wiping away the sweat of fever. A treatise on the combined infantry and cavalry tactics of the Third Siege of Osrameth and shifting paradigms of strategy in complex battlefield leadership. Snappy, growls Renekton, soaking the cloth again. He pauses. I led that battle. Nasus smiles at him. You wrote a book about me? It'll be the centerpiece, brother. Promise me you'll build it.
You'll build it,
he snaps. Nasus sinks back into the pillow a little and shrugs weakly. Renekton takes him by the shoulders.
You'll build it, and you'll fill it, and you'll teach the whole damn country to read it. When the emissary returns with the healing water...
The Blessed Isles are a myth, Renekton. They're fairy tales.
When she returns, you'll build it all.
Nasus looks at his brother, at his scars and his blind injured eye, at his calluses and missing nails and the seared skin on his arm where an enemy spell had once burned him. His brother could wrestle a rock bear with one arm, but holding the bloody washcloth and leaning over the bed, he has never looked so powerless. Nasus reaches up and touches his cheek. You cannot fight this for me. I am dying.
See if I can't. You...
There's a rapping on the door, and a small man in golden vestments strides through, arms outstretched in magnanimous gesture. Renekton moves like a snake. Attend and bear witness, the proclamation of the Lord of the Sun is... Ah! The golden herald is pinned against the wall, with a knife at his neck and, worse, Renekton's snarling mouth level with his eyes. No, Renekton, Nasus coughs from the bed. Renekton, peace! Gold-tipped spears level frantically at Renekton from all sides as the herald's escorts scramble to their duty. Renekton holds the man in the air, his feet kicking desperately for a very long moment. Then he lowers him, slowly, robotically, and sheathes the knife. He stares. I have intruded. My apologies. Lords Renekton and Nasus, The herald coughs and readjusts his collar with trembling hands. The proclamation of the Lord of the Sun... The herald unfurls a golden scroll, holding it in front of him like a shield. The Lord of the Sun proclaims the ascension of the honored scholar Nasus of the Collegium of the Sun on the, Renekton's eye bores into him. On the day of the new moon! That's it! Renekton stands motionless for a long while. The herald's escorts glance at each other, a little nervously, pulling their spears back. Ha! Renekton laughs, suddenly, explosively, and one of the guards levels her spear at him again.
Ha, the bastard! Listen!
He stomps his foot and claps his hands together and turns triumphantly towards Nasus.
He listened, brother!
Bastard? Peeps the golden herald, confused. The Emperor? Renekton sweeps towards the bed, almost dancing.
He listened. Ascension! Ascension, Nasus!
Renekton, you didn't.
I did? You're damn right I did.
Nasus coughs and tries to sit up, and Renekton grabs him by the shoulders and presses their foreheads together.
You'll write your library.
His good eye is glowing with fiery pride.
You'll write 1,000. Shurima will know your name.
He squeezes his brother's shoulders tightly. Nasus feels a tremble in his hand. Renekton, Ascension is dangerous. I don't know if I can...
The gods ascend the worthy.
Renekton stares him down.
There's none more worthy than you. None more. You'll make it.
Nasus wants to say that that is a myth, that the sun disk selects not for the most worthy, but the most powerful, those who can survive the purgation of its fire. He wants to say that the ascension ritual always kills the ill and the infirm. But he looks at his brother, and he sees not the grizzled veteran, not the commander of armies, but the scrawny alley kid who burst through the doors of their hovel all those years ago, waving the acceptance letter from the collegium, who cheered and shouted so loudly that the neighbors came out from their houses to see what was happening. Renekton, who climbed to the roof and shouted to the laughter and cheer of the whole street that, "My brother's gonna make it." Renekton's voice is barely more than a whisper. His eyes are closed, and he presses his head fiercely into Nasus's shoulder.
He's gonna make it.
The sun disk gleams in glory perched above the golden palace. From atop the palace balcony, Nasus sees crowds of thousands cheering for him down below. His ceremonial robes are heavy and would be unbearably warm in the heat if he wasn't shivering with fever. The Emperor, a wobbling shape of gold and silk in front of him, is giving a speech, something about the strength and glory of the nation, the honor of ascension. Everything sounds as though it's coming through a long and echoing tunnel, and Nasus's vision swims. Still, he doesn't waver. Up along the pyramid steps in full military regalia and swollen with pride, he knows Renekton is looking at him. The high priest shoots him a disdainful look. They resent the idea of a commoner being granted the honor of the ritual. They resent that the Emperor ordered it, that their authority over the disk is threatened. Nasus is beyond caring. All that matters now is that at least he will end honorably. Perhaps it'll be better to go quick rather than fade, rather than put Renekton through another year of caring for him while he shrinks and shrivels. The robes are so heavy. Exactly halfway up the steps, Renekton towers over his men, over the priests and clerics assembled in front of him. His helmet is crested high with purple plumes, and his ceremonial armor is polished to a mirror shine. But more than just his physical size, he fills the space with presence. Never has a soldier stood more at attention. Never has a sword been held more stiffly in salute. His men eye their commander, normally so brusque and informal, with glances of concern, and hold themselves straighter and stand taller to follow his example. In front of the soldiers, a priest growls to his colleague, "It's a disgrace that a commoner walk these steps." If Renekton hears it, he doesn't move a muscle to show it.
"Sure Lani would weep if she were here to see it,"
croaks the other, ancient and white-haired.
Standards are falling, standards are falling. Oh, mark my words, oh, they have fallen."
"What's that jumped-up scribe done to earn it, anyway? Do you know he published a book correcting the high priest's translation of the prayers?"
Disrespectful, standards have fallen, you mark my words."
They go on like this, and other voices in the crowd grumble the same, resentful, apathetic, or gossiping. Baseborn do not belong under the sun disk's light. He must have tricked his way into it somehow. Have you heard he's sick? They said he's dying. But he will be burned to dust soon enough. Unworthy. Unworthy. Above it all, the sunlight gleams off of Renekton's raised saber. The Emperor turns to Nasus with a sweeping gesture and takes his hand. Nasus kneels, legs shaking under the robes, and kisses the hand and rises. The Emperor says something, the ceremonial prayer, and he beckons towards the stairs, and Nasus breathes deep of the stinging, bright air. He turns and walks. Slowly. He feels each step like needles in his knees, and yet it's like he's walking on air, insubstantial and treacherous. He wills his feet forward. He wills his spine straight. The robes are so heavy. He ascends the first step and knows there are exactly 443 left.
He totters. Standards have fallen,
growls the white-haired priest.
Chiral, why, he took those steps two at a time. I remember my great-grandfather saw his ceremony.
Disgraceful, agrees the other. The slaves will wash the steps for days to be rid of him.
Of course, in those days, the sun disk was brighter. They polished it every day, you know. Standards have fallen.
There are 409 steps left. Renekton's soldiers are cooking slowly in their armor. Slaves duck through the crowd, bringing water to the priests, the clerics, the functionaries. The soldiers don't move a muscle to take the goblets when they're offered. Today is not the day to step out of line. There are 359 steps left. An excited child breaks through the line up the steps, pointing to the sun disk and dancing. Light-hearted laughter goes up from the crowd as an embarrassed noblewoman pulls him away by his ear. There are steps left. Nasus doesn't feel the ground anymore. Even the robes feel insubstantial around his arms, but the air is like molasses. He can barely push it out of his lungs. He's blinded briefly by a shine, and he looks towards it. Renekton is there, bright and beautiful, and he holds a sword of fire, and the light bursts around his shoulders like waterfalls. Renekton grins up at him, bruised and scrawny, and he's missing 3 teeth, but he beams like the sun. He beat those other boys, every single one. They won't bully Nasus again. Nasus reaches out for his brother's face to clean the blood from his nose, but he recedes like a mirage. Panic rises in his chest. It'll get infected. No, he has to clean it. He promised Mother that he would. Renekton sees his brother staring at him. He sees him raise a withered hand, trembling against the heavy robes, and a gasp goes up from the crowd as Nasus stumbles over his own feet and falls onto the steps. The thud knocks the air from his lungs, and flecks of blood stain the polished stone. For a moment, nobody moves, and slowly a murmur starts to rise in the crowd. Below, the Emperor begins some sort of hushed argument with the High Priest. Renekton's hand trembles on the hilt of the saber.
He totters, I told you. I told you he totters, not like the old days. Standards.
The other priest shrugs and spits casually on the ground.
Disgraceful. Disgraceful. But what else do you expect from some sick fatherless dog?
Nasus hears the screams echoing from the end of some long, dark tunnel. He's being shaken, thumping up and down. The light wobbles in front of him, and he blinks against it. Renekton's chin fades into focus, and then his face, his shoulders, and the sky is moving above them. Renekton is tearing his way up the pyramid, blood streaming from a wound on his arm. A soldier charges him, slow and unwieldy in her showpiece uniform, and Renekton kicks aside her spear and bowls the woman over, sending her clattering down the stairs. Below, Renekton's soldiers are brawling with the temple guards, and somewhere in the crowd 2 priests are bleeding on the stone. There are 142 steps left. Renekton, Nasus whispers, failing to raise a hand to touch him. Brother, what have you...
You're gonna make it,
Renekton growls, scaling 3 steps with each stride. Nasus's eyes finally resolve the sun disk above them as it begins to eclipse the sky. It thrums with power. Brother, no. Nasus struggles to lift his arms, cradled against Renekton's chest. Every thundering step sends bolts of pain through his back. There are 62 steps left. The Templar guards level their spears as Renekton closes in, and he roars like an animal. One surges forward, and Renekton turns his shoulder against their spear, which strikes wide off the armor. He steps in and headbutts their helmeted chin, and they stumble backwards into the next guard, who catches them, and Renekton surges past them. Brother, no, brother. Nasus begs, scratching with his nails against Renekton's chest. No, it'll kill you. It'll kill us both.
You are going to make it,
Renekton intones. There are 5 steps left. Please, Nasus croaks. You can live. Don't do this. You can live. Above them, the radiant sun disk explodes. Not without you.
The false emperor is dead! The empire of slaves is fallen!
The abomination that was Zerath hurls lightning, tearing the ground to shreds in a line before him. Thunder reverberates around the golden palace, booming off the surface of the sun disk, which hovers impassive above it all. The air crackles with power, expanding and contracting into Zerath's form, and straining against the chains and shards of the magical coffin meant to contain him. The plan hadn't worked, but it had weakened him. Renekton roars and tears a slab of rock out of the pyramid steps and hurls it at the magus. It shatters against the coffin, sending the thing plummeting down the steps.
The Ascended bow to me! The sun disk has exalted me!
It howls, righting itself in the air and blasting the place that Renekton stood with arcane fire. Renekton himself scrambles up the pyramid, fingers gouging into the rock, and from a perch high above he jumps and launches himself at Zerath like a projectile.
Shut up!
He shouts, growling as tendrils of magic tear into his flesh upon contact. Zerath screams incoherently as he tumbles down the steps again, bolts of magic bursting from his body and searing holes in the world around him. Again he catches himself swiveling in the air and raising something approximating an arm.
Bow before me! Supplicate!
And more lightning crackles through the air, missing Renekton by a mile and bouncing off of the sun disk instead. Nasus's axe curves through the air from behind, and magic explodes from the impact as it connects.
You are Bakai!
He shouts as Zerath tumbles.
You are unformed. You are chaos.
Zerath twirls through the air and then swivels his coffin head around, glowing eyes focusing on the new foe.
Betrayer! Usurper!
More lightning tears the ground, but Nasus evades him easily.
He has no control.
Nasus shouts, ducking behind a still-standing pillar.
He will tear the city apart. Well, nothing seems to hurt him.
Renekton growls, ducking under another arc of power.
The bastard won't bleed.
They push at the pillar together, which cracks under their strength and topples onto Zerath, whose screaming is briefly muffled under the rocks. The ground shakes and rumbles, and a dozen tons of carved marble explodes into dust, sending a shockwave across the side of the pyramid that cracks the rocks themselves. Zerath howls out of the rubble, spinning and exploding, shards of the magical coffin bursting off him and snapping back together like rubber bands.
How do we destroy him? We can't.
Nasus growls, shielding himself with a slab of rock as a spell explodes against it.
He is nothing. He has no form to undo. He is a nexus of magic swirling around an untethered soul. He is...
Renekton groans.
He is a ghost, think of it that way. So what do we do?
Renekton pulls Nasus's head down as a blade of magic cleaves the air where he stood. Nasus is quiet for a deadly moment.
We give him something to haunt.
Renekton rams into Zerath, sending him spiraling, and Nasus surges forward, bashing at the unbreakable coffin with his axe. Then Renekton hurls a boulder, then he charges, then Nasus, then Renekton. Every blow sends explosions of magic rocketing through the city, breaking house walls and searing fountains dry. Screaming and howling, demanding fealty and promising apocalypse, Zerath is driven backwards and backwards, out of the palace complex and towards the tomb of emperors. The brothers work like dancers, surging through and past each other, weaving under spells and past debris, hammering the chaotic wraith towards the gaping mouth of a giant structure. The tomb of the emperors had been built to withstand all assault, all magic, all power. It was built to stand for all eternity, a monument to Shurima's glory for every generation to come after. It was invincible, inside and out. Renekton throws himself like an avalanche against the raging magus, and Zerath tumbles backwards towards the mouth of the tomb. Nasus rushes forward to seal the door, but Zerath surges out again, clearing the door and filling the air with sorcery.
I see your mind, usurpers, betrayers. You mean to bury your emperor.
Renekton hurls a boulder against him again, but this time he blasts it apart before it touches him.
I built this door. This tomb was consecrated in my magic. Here my power ascends.
Nasus arcs his axe around, and it clatters off the coffin shards, which surge to meet it, as though directed. Zerath is driven back only the barest inch, and Nasus howls as a surge of lightning sears his arm.
He's gaining control. Yes, control!
Nasus barely dodges a sphere of fire and shakes his injured arm as it regenerates. Renekton batters that sphere away with his weapon and grunts as it explodes across his flesh. Zerath's form, formerly a chaotic swirl of magic and coffin pieces, begins to coalesce, the shards resolving into the shape of something vaguely human.
We need not be enemies, sons of Shurima.
His crackling voice drops from deranged howling into something approaching a human tone.
The ascension disturbed me. Even for me, it was too much.
Zerath flexes a wraith-like hand in front of himself, almost as though seeing it for the first time.
If not for the effects of this coffin, I might have lost myself completely. Truly, the Sun Disk's power is immense.
Renekton hurls another slab of rock out of a nearby wall, but it turns to dust in the air before it even reaches the magus.
The empire of slaves is ended, and a new day dawns.
Zerath reaches out in magnanimous gesture.
I need not be emperor. No, not like Azir. I will be as a guardian god, a god for all Shurima's children. And you!
Zerath's eyes seem to light up as though taken by some magnificent vision, and he laughs.
The powers I could bestow you, do you not see? The Sun Disk is no gift of the gods. It is a tool. It is the light of the stars. I am the stars.
Renekton sidles closer to Nasus, putting a protective shoulder between his brother and the rambling apparition.
We could all be as gods. It would be so easy. Power, if only you grasp it.
He reaches out as though towards some invisible thing, and then his coffin head snaps suddenly to attention on the brothers again.
You will like me.
He snarls.
Commoners, children of the dirt, spat on. What reward did Shurima ever give you? What were you ever given? Even as ascended, you were only servants to the Emperor. Slaves! Slaves!
The air flares with magic again, resolving into ghostly shapes as though giving form to Zerath's thoughts. Nasus thinks he sees there, briefly, 2 young men embracing like brothers. Renekton's grip on his weapon shifts. He lowers it a little.
What do you want? To burn the Empire.
Says Zerath with sudden calm.
To tear it down, every brick, every statue, every slave house, every noble's filthy temple, and from it to build Shurima again, as it always should have been. And you will be its god,
says Nasus, studying the patterns of magic that Zerath is weaving. He's building a spell of some kind, an incantation.
We will be its gods.
Zerath seems to unfocus again. His form wobbles.
Yes, gods. Gods above them all. Above the whips. Above the supplication. Above him.
Asir's face seems to flash through the patterns of magic briefly. Renekton grunts and stabs his axe into the ground.
Sounds good to me. Yes, Renekton, the liberator of the sands, Lord of hosts, yes, God of wars, and you.
He points at Nasus.
Vizier of viziers, scholar of scholars, keeper of histories.
Images of infinite libraries flash through the patterns of magic.
What else is left, brother?
Renekton says, casually, gesturing broadly and striding forward towards the hovering magus.
Asir is dust, the royal family's dead, and the priests... well, fuck him, anyway. Brother, you cannot... Don't tell me what I can't do!
Renekton is suddenly aggressive.
You heard the man. No more slaves, no more emperors, no more obedience.
Renekton turns towards Zerath expectantly.
Yes. No more orders, no more obedience. You will bow only to me.
Renekton grins.
You see, brother? Only to him.
And he kneels in the sand. It stirs and starts to whirl around Renekton's feet. Nasus suddenly understands.
Brother, no!
But his shout is drowned out by a howl of power, a thunder like sandstorms. A hurricane of dust explodes and Renekton swells, red eyes aflame, and he surges, locking his enormous arms around Zerath's coffin body.
Usurper! Betrayer!
The Magus explodes and explodes with power. Lightning and flame tears across Renekton's form, which repairs itself as fast as Zerath can destroy it, and the Butcher of the Sands rushes through the opening of the tomb, whose wards thrum and dissipate the Magus' raging powers.
Renekton! Renekton!
Nasus' axe falls to the sand as he dashes madly after the two. Inside, Renekton whips his head around.
It is the only way!
Nasus stops dead.
You know it must be done.
And Renekton heaves forward, dragging Zerath deeper into the gloom.
No.
He hears the roars of his brother and the mad howling of Zerath, screaming scorched earth at the entire empire. Light and lightning surges from the gloom, and the Butcher's sandstorm whistles against the stones. On the precipice between the dark of the tomb and the light of the sun, Nasus trembles.
No. No. No!
He throws his arms wide and grabs hold of the twin golden handles of the double doors, and he howls the death cry of jackals as he pulls. The doors rumble and slide and slowly come together. Inside the tomb, the column of sunlight from outside begins to narrow. As the light cuts to a sliver and dies, he hears an echoing call above the noise.
Live well, brother.
The tomb doors slam shut, and their magics fuse the stone. And as Nasus collapses among the rubble and glass-boiled sand, the words he whispers are lost to the dry Shuriman wind. And that's a story. If you enjoyed it, I am glad, and you can find the written version on my Archive of Our Own account link in the description. Now, you only have yourselves to blame for this, really. I wrote that goddamn Olaf and Soraka story a while ago, and you fools enabled me. You encouraged me. You did this to yourselves. Being serious for a minute, though, I have made the argument before that Shurima, especially ancient Shurima, is incredibly fertile grounds for storytelling, and, well, consider this video my amateur attempt to prove my point, I guess. Throw some professional writers and better voice actors at the story of Renekton and Nasus, and I think you have a show there, or a novel, or a game. The core of their relationship is that they love each other very deeply. That is why it is tragic how horribly Renekton has fallen. That is why it is tragic that Nasus has become so emotionally scarred and apathetic in the modern day. So yeah, I got some fiction out of my system, and it'll probably be a while before I do it again, but if you have a thought about a character dynamic or a relationship that deserves to be explored a little bit more, why not put it down in the comments? I mean, you never know. Anyway, let us play the emoji game. This is the game where you put a particular emoji down in the comments, and then I put a heart on your comment, and then maybe, if we're lucky, we can confuse some people who don't watch the video all the way to the end. The emoji today is the steaming bowl emoji, just because I happen to be hungry right at this particular moment, and it looks kind of good. This is a sponsored video, so no shilling for the Patreon today. If you want to support the channel, you're welcome to, but you don't have to. Instead, I'll shill for my Twitch channel, where I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV. And after only 150 hours, I have almost reached the first expansion, Heavensward. It is, though, a very good time. People generally follow me around and get into shenanigans or show off some truly amazing glams, and I have a lot of fun streaming it for people. So come along and watch that if you want. But if you're not much for streaming, I have an excellent editor helping me turn them into shorter, snappier VODs over on my Let's Play channel. Right, thank you very much for watching. Remember to be kind to one another, have solidarity with those who are worse off than yourself, and may the tides of history wash gently over us all.